Hello and welcome to another episode of the Out of Spec podcast. We are going to be running through every single team that joined in our I-90 surge, which was an electric car race from Seattle to Boston across the country. In total, we had 9 electric cars racing and one combustion car actually to kind of set the pace. And out of all the vehicles that we've had, we're talking to the group that drove the Lucid Air. So if you haven't yet had a chance to check out the series, we have over 10 hours of content on the Out of Spec Motoring channel. And then, of course, summary videos to come, including this one right here to document how it was to drive our 2025 Lucid Air Grand Touring, the full range spec. It's a long-termer that Lucid loaned to Out of Spec to make a bunch of videos, including this one for you guys. And I've had 3 of my buddies, my dad, my buddy Shane, and my buddy Alex, all of which are car experts, very familiar with Lucid. Shane, who's a current Lucid owner, my dad, who's a previous Lucid owner, and Alex, who's an automotive journalist who's driven many Lucids, many miles. And so we really put together this awesome team. And now it's time for these guys to share their stories.
This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes.
So thank you all for joining. And I think to kick this off, what I want to do is before we even get into the trip, we called up Lucid and said, hey, here's what we're going to do. Can we set up a meeting with your engineers? Can we talk to you? So Alex, maybe you can talk about that initial call we had about a week before the drive.
Absolutely, Kyle. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great trip. And I wouldn't have rather done it at any other car but the Lucid. But yeah, to your point, Lucid was kind enough to host us with one of their battery and charging bosses. And he just let us really pick his brain. We set out with attitude to win, of course. And we wanted to know all the different tips and secrets of what we could do, with temperature inside, what we could do with our speed, what we could do with the buffer, how much buffer we actually had available to us, talking about optimizing for charging, of course, at what state of charge we want to plug in, at what state of charge we want to unplug. So really, I think we went through every layer and every kind of potential consideration that an EV driver would have in a long distance drive to know really how to make the most out of the battery and out of the charging. And yeah, we were speaking literally to, I think you can maybe remind me exactly what his role is, but he was a bigwig of battery and charging at Lucid. So I don't think he was holding anything back from us. And I think he wanted to really give us all the advantage we could for his car.
Yeah, so we first spoke with the guy who does all of the EPA certification testing for Lucid. So this was someone who is absolutely focused on outright efficiency. And at first, it was kind of funny when we were talking to him. I don't think he fully realized what we were going to do. He's like, but if you drive slower, you can go farther. But I'm like, if we drive faster, you can end up with a quicker overall trip time. And then he's like, oh yeah, if you drive faster and charge fast, then that's the fastest way to go. And I'm like, okay, but I've set maximum speed caps for everyone. And ultimately at the end of the conversation, what we left feeling was, drive it, rather than maximizing for efficiency. This is not an efficiency drive. This is a total trip time. It was like, drive at the maximum speed that you can and maximize the amount of time that the car is taking in full power. Now, every electric car in this test has advantages and disadvantages. One of the big, most amazing advantages of Lucid Air is the massive range. And that is what that car is known for. So Shane, maybe you can walk us through the first leg. What was the idea behind pushing it? You certainly went farther than anyone else in the surge on the first leg, including the combustion car. You had the longest range car there, but Lucids tend to not do as well at very high speed in terms of outright range when compared with our 70 mile per hour number. So Shane, what happened on that first leg?
Yeah, so like you're saying, the Lucid's got the most range out of all these cars, including the combustion car. And so really
Sounds like Shane's internet connection isn't great. Alex, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that first leg. You guys really stretched it as far as you could, but there was just a weird gap in infrastructure where you couldn't go all the way to zero, which happened with almost everyone, of course.
Right, exactly. So it was a great, I think, we have the data we can pull up, but I think it was more than 300 miles, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I'm pulling up the first leg. So you arrived at 13%. Dad, do you know the exact distance? You were telling me about this earlier.
345 miles, and
Right.
and we couldn't go to the next station because the infrastructure got pretty thin.
Yeah.
So we were able to go farther than anyone on that first leg, which is the advantage because we left with a 100% state of charge.
Right, and I think that's what's important to reiterate here is, yes, the Lucid does have an amazing total range when it's at 100%, which is what we had when we left Seattle. But at no point through the rest of the trip did we come anywhere close to 100% charge and maximum range on the battery. So exactly with this, we made it an awesome stretch all the way to Smelterville to, make our first charge. But, even then, 350 miles or 300, whatever it was, 345 miles, excuse me. Sure, the Lucid could go a lot farther, but anyone who's road tripped to EV knows that chargers are going to be where chargers are going to be. So, throughout the drive, we were looking 1 or 2 stops ahead, to see what would be optimal. And although, we arrived here first, and I think we did, maintain our at least first or second place in the surge after this first stop. We just didn't have the opportunity from this point or any other time to really maximize the Lucid's potential range because of the charging curve, which we'll get into, I'm sure.
Yeah. So one thing we also did was we know a lot of Lucid employees. Of course, I think there's we've been lucky enough in reviewing cars, Alex, you as well. You get to know people who are responsible for certain things and really know the cars inside and out. And everyone at all these companies are excited when we do something like this. It's like the ultimate benchmarking comparison. So friends at Lucid had their eyes laser focused on this. And one of the things that a friend of mine who is very high up at Lucid said, run the car to zero. It's got a huge buffer. Ride that, basically target 0% and eat into the buffer to maximize the charging performance, because the car charges really fast until about 15 to 20%, and then it starts to come down. So you really want to target those 0% arrivals. And it looks like, just looking at the data here, that's what you guys did. I mean, I'm looking at 2% arrival into Butte, 0% arrival into Billings. Dad, can you tell us a little bit about that strategy early on?
Yeah.
What that was?
Yeah. So the first decision was, what state of charge were we going to leave Smelterville, Idaho at? And originally we thought 80% would be the conservative number, but after much deliberation, after looking at the Windy app, after looking at altitude, we decided to leave Smelterville with a 75% state of charge, which would have gotten us in, according to the route planner in the Lucid, with about a 5% state of charge. And we felt like that was okay. While we were going on that leg, though, what ended up happening was we started to learn the car. And we started to learn that above the 70-mile-an-hour trip that you had, which we know every car, so as soon as you start going faster, whether you're going 80 versus 70, you're going to be eating up exponentially more energy. We started to pop between 1, 2, and 3%, and we ended up having to lower the speeds just a bit between Smelterville and Butte. And so we ended up pulling into Butte with a 2% state of charge. And we probably, at the point in time when the BMS was telling us that we were at 1%, 2%, that's when we wish we could have eaten it up with more speed. But at that point in time, we brought it up to the 10 over, which we were allowed to do at that point.
Yeah, so that's the thing. When you're on your own normal trip or a cannonball, you can always drive faster to arrive at 0%. However, when you have a speed cap, it really comes down to the elevation of the route. It comes down to the wind, and of course, the external temperature. Now, the 2025 Lucid Air that you had, was one of the most efficient cars of the trip. I want to say second most efficient, just to the Model 3. Maybe Ioniq 6 was up there as well. It was top 3 in efficiency, but you had a heat pump to help. And this was a tough stretch for everyone, because leaving Seattle, I think a lot of us did our calculations off of that first leg, stuck in denser traffic, lower speed limits, get out to Montana, you're pegged at the route maximum that we set of 85 miles an hour, which is 5 over the limit. Alex, what did you think about that? Obviously, that probably came at a little bit of a shock to the efficiency when the speeds got up there.
Yeah, exactly. As you can see in the data here, we got pretty comfortable running it into the buffer and arriving with 0. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but I think that speed differential and how it, is an exponential increase in energy consumption is really what was the nail in the coffin for our fateful 0, running out of battery situation that kind of screwed us over.
What I would say, Kyle, and I wish Shane were on here. I know he's having internet trouble, but look, in hindsight, we made a mistake leaving Butte at a 58% state of charge. We talked about leaving there with a 65% state of charge, but looking ahead at the next leg in order to get to Billings, we thought we would be okay. Unfortunately, we really did not have the efficiency at the speeds we were going from Butte to Billings. And that's where we ended up having to go, believe it or not, 15 miles an hour under what the Taycan did. And that's where Drew took us over. On the leg from Butte to Billings, they passed us. And that was an unfortunate mistake. Had we gone to 65%, we could have kept the speeds up and we would have stayed in the lead. But, we're going to talk about what happened in Billings when we first arrived there to see what kind of speeds the Taycan was pulling deep into the pack. But this is what I would say is that we made a mistake early on by not charging a little bit deeper into the pack. And my observation is that the Lucid is just not anywhere near as efficient as other cars that I've driven at higher speeds. It really seems to munch the kilowatts at 80 or 85 miles an hour.
So I think what you're probably feeling is not that it's necessarily less efficient than other cars that you've driven, but the delta between 70 and 80 is probably bigger than other cars. And the speed limit, just so you know, between Butte and Billings was 80, which meant that we could cap it at 85. And that's what we were doing. And we just chowed down on energy. And I remember with Alex and Shane, we were like, wow, we really have to back off on the speed. And so we were letting it bounce between 0 and 1% for quite a while. And then all of a sudden we look in the rearview mirror and there's the Taycan, and he ripped by us going 15 miles an hour faster. We were doing 70, he was doing 85. And that was not fun. So that's the first leg. I don't think you guys, and to be totally clear, that was not unique to Lucid that you guys had to drop speed. Us in the i7 got some miscalculations. Taycan had to drop speed. Model 3, every other car at some point had to drop speed on a stretch. After that, did you guys kind of learn your lesson and then just kind of keep the speeds up the whole way?
Well, no, because that's what ended up,
So up until the last section,
yes.
But the whole middle of the country, like after that Billings stop, you guys were, as far as I could tell, you were keeping it rocking, right?
Well, we pulled in as an example, Gillette, Wyoming, we pulled in at 8%. The next stop, Wall, South Dakota, we pulled in at 14%. So we kind of got smacked down pretty hard in the first part of the trip. And I say that we did learn our lesson. Then we started to get a little more aggressive. And we did pull into Sioux Falls with a 0% state of charge, knowing we had a buffer, knowing what the Lucid engineers had told us, knowing what you had seen, Kyle, with your 70 mile an hour test. Yeah. We felt very confident that we would be able to be okay pulling into Sioux Falls at 0%.
Yeah. So for that Sioux Falls, I remember I was driving for that one, and I think there was some road construction, which was kind of making our navigation a little wonky. It was thinking we were much further away from the charger than we actually were. We ended up taking a freeway exit, one exit early so we could get on surface streets, just so that, I knew we should drive very slowly, and I didn't want to be holding up freeway traffic, especially in one-lane construction zones at like 35, 40 miles an hour. So these streets that we took had some some declines and inclines. And I remember just driving as gently as I ever have, because we were solidly into the zero at that point. And yeah, it was a time where maybe if we had, instead of going 75 or 85, had just, gone 5 miles an hour less, it would have made things just a little simpler for us then.
Yeah, so you guys but it sounds like for most of the stretches, other than that first one, and maybe towards the end of that Sioux Falls stretch, you guys were able to maintain, that 10 over pace
Yes.
with the car,
Yes,
which I think wasn't totally shown in the video that well. And actually, I only learned this after talking to my dad, where like the general, like looking at the commenters and the viewers and everything, people were like, wow, you guys always were dropping speed. But it was such a big portion and so noticeable early on, because that's when we were all together. And I don't think it was totally portrayed in the video that you guys genuinely, for most of the trip, were at 10 over.
Yeah. And then I think, in Sioux Falls, when we were there at that Electrify America, at least 3 or 4 other cars in the surge pulled up. So we knew at that point, was a reminder of just how close the race was. And yeah, after that, getting through, Minnesota and Wisconsin, and especially in Illinois, when Shane was ripping it through Chicago traffic, we were going as fast as we could, fast as we were allowed, for sure.
Kyle, there's another factor here which I want to bring in, which is the charging curve on this Lucid.
Well, we'll get there. Don't worry.
Okay.
I'm just trying to answer the commenters that think you drove slow across the whole country, which
No, we did not. No.
Yeah. But
no, as a matter of fact,
Dad, one real quick thing, just another big point here is it wasn't just you guys who had to drop speed. My impression is definitely everyone had to drop speed at some point. Who dropped speed more than the other? I mean, that's part of the kind of fun of these challenges, but it's definitely not like you guys were unfairly slow for most of the trip. Just wanted to get that out. Dad, you can go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you look at the next 4 charging stops after Sioux Falls, you'll see we were pulling it at 8%, 11%, 13%, 11%. And we were in no way, shape, or form were we dropping speed at all. And then, then we started to say, okay, this is where the race started to get interesting. The Taycan was so far out in front. We were hoping to catch the believe it or not, that Tesla Model 3 rear wheel drive. But who was nipping at our heels was the Ioniq 6. And so we decided to get a little more aggressive to when we were going to pull into Sheffield, Ohio. And we used the buffer, like the engineer said to use, once again. And we had another data point. We were probably, if I recall, at least 10 miles, somewhere around 10 miles. When it said 0, we went another 10 miles. And a lot of that was just, again, determining what state of charge should we leave at. And really, all of us, Shane, and I know I was very vocal on the video for most of it, because that's just kind of how it went. Was I was filming, but and Alex, please chime in. We were absolutely making decisions together and thinking about what we were going to do. Then once we decided that, okay, let's film.
No question. Yeah, that's exactly how it went. There was some downtime and we got to know each other and we got to hang out and chit chat and whatnot. But a lot of the talk was about strategy and, like I said, looking far ahead, trying to calculate our efficiency in real time, just using all the tools available, doing some math on our own phones, calculators to optimize. And there was a lot of strategy to talk throughout this.
Alex, tell me about the trip planner in the car. When you would leave the station, I mean, I've driven Lucid quite a bit. It gives you 2 different metrics as to how you're going to get to that next station. The first is in the navigation menu, it shows you a state of charge on arrival predicted in percent. Yeah. And then on the display, weirdly, it shows you in miles.
Yes.
How did you find those calculations updating in real time? What would you tend to leave with? And then what would you end up arriving to the stations with after the car's prediction?
Yeah, it would generally predict a lot more range, maybe not a lot more range, but a good amount more range than we actually would have had access to. So, maybe through the first third of these charging stops, we were kind of like figuring out what its peculiarities were. But after that point, say Sioux Falls or Stewartville, for example, we knew not to trust it. We knew to go a little bit more, than we thought we needed. And the vehicle would eventually update, after a couple minutes of driving, 10 or 15 minutes or so of driving, perhaps. And then it would drop back down less range than it had told us that we had when we departed, which was the more reasonable estimate. And at that point, it was fairly accurate. But yeah, consistently pulling off a charger, we had a lot more range than we predicted than we actually ended up having.
Kyle, I'll give you an example. When we left Fredonia, New York, which is where things just got, in my opinion, inconsistent. The state of charge of arrival in Albany, Rensselaer, showed 5% in the car, and when we hit 0% right outside of Albany, we were 7.5 miles away from.
No, we'll get there. Don't skip ahead. We'll get there. We'll get there. Let's not talk about the incident. I want to get there in a minute. I want to, now that Shane's back, while we have him. Shane, we've gone through a lot of the stats so far, a lot of the speed, really saying that, okay, other than early on in that first Montana stretch, you guys were pushing. You, of course, were trying to keep the Ioniq 6 off your heels. Overall, in the first, let's say, 1,500 miles of the trip, how was the strategy working? How was the team? What was your impression of how everything went for really the first 1,500 miles when you guys were, just overtaken by Tycon and a few other things were happening? What was your impression?
So I think really that first part of the trip was when we were doing the best. We were arriving at low states of charge, like was recommended by Lucid themselves, and how we typically, and we know it charges best when it's, below 10% state of charge at least. So we were just following that through these stops, clear out until like Sioux Falls was 1,500 miles. So I think, Smelterville was great. Butte was great. Billings was great, minus me misreading the charger and us having to double back.
Let's talk about that. So a lot of people think you spent a lot of time doubling back. There wasn't much filming going on in that no. time period. Can you tell us about how that whole exchange happened and how much time you think you guys lost in that Billings exchange?
Yeah. So essentially what happened is, we were aiming for, about 60% today's charge.
Oh no, that's all the Shane time we get? Really? Is he coming back? Oh no, Shane's connection. Alex, maybe Shane can try again and get reconnected.
Yeah,
but
I hope he can come in, but I'm happy to fill in. We lost very little time in that doubling back, maybe 5 to 7 minutes. It was not long. Yeah, this was one of our amateur moments of few in the race. We were looking at the tower, we weren't looking at the vehicle. And somehow I forget exactly which stat we misread, but yeah, we thought we had more charge than we actually did. So thus we, yanked it off the charger, got onto the road. It was like maybe a quarter mile of driving, half a mile at the most, before we were like, oh wait, actually the car is showing us a lot less charge than we thought we had. And at that point we were like, oh duh, it's because we were looking at the screen on the terminal that showed us an accurate data point, but one that just we misread. We have the time. It was like 4 a.m. or something, or wee hours of the night at that point. So forgive us for that. But yeah, we immediately turned around, got plugged back in, it started up again. It was not a significant amount of time that we spent, doing that doubling back. So barely fast.
Obviously, the video's out, the story's out, people are talking about it. You guys towards the end of the trip did run out of charge, and which is I think you were pushing it. It's awesome. So Alex, you were driving at the time when the car ran out of charge, and it happened where exactly? Somewhere after Fredonia. Can you explain what was going on?
Yeah, I can. So yes, I was driving, and it was dozen or so miles outside of Albany. Oh, welcome back, Shane. So we were looking at our app that showed the location of all the other drivers, and we just knew that we were at this point racing for third with the Ioniq 6 and the Model S Plaid, basically. And we knew that the Ioniq 6 was closest, and we were watching as we were plugged in. there in Fredonia, and we were just thinking about what the minimum amount of charge we could take was, right? And I believe what happened is we let the Ioniq 6 pass us on the highway, knowing that they would have to plug in before us. And we then knew if we were going to make it to Albany, there was this kind of abundance of chargers, actually. There was a Walmart that we were targeting EA at Walmart. And if we got there first, then we would stay ahead. But we also knew that we really had to maximize our speed on that stretch to stay ahead of the Ioniq 6. So we let the Ioniq 6 pass us. We saw that on the app, and we got back on the road with the minimum amount that we thought we needed. And sure enough, we saw the Ioniq 6 pulling into a Apple Green and plugging in, and we were like, yes, we're ahead. But this is where this exponential increase in energy consumption really came in, because we knew we needed to keep our speed up to stay ahead. But in keeping our speed up, we also consumed a lot more energy in this particular stretch where we had ran into the buffer before. We had really dropped the speed down, to 70 or so miles an hour. I remember at that point I had the cruise set at 77 because it was a 65 zone, and the Lucid is optimistic by 2 miles an hour according to GPS speed. So we were doing 75 miles an hour exactly, and that speed compared to doing 70 or 65 caused a lot more energy consumption and just tanked our efficiency compared to the stretches where we had comfortably run into the buffer before. And
so
yes,
before you guys even ran out, there was a station that you passed. Dad, it was an Apple Green station, right?
That was an Apple Green station. We passed it at 14%, and there wasn't even a consideration for us to stop at that Apple Green. We were like, we're going, because basically the state of charge, when we left Fredonia, the car told us we would arrive in Albany at a 5% state of charge. When we hit the Apple Green, we're at 14%, and we're like, we're not going to have even an issue. I remember Alex was driving. I was in the passenger seat. I took a little snooze. Everything was good. And then it was about 12 miles, a dozen miles, and before we would hit Albany. And that's where Alex said, Dave, wake up. I am losing power. And I said, what do you mean you're losing power? And the car was at 0%. Now, again, he was at 77, which is GPS, 75. And the car, something, either it consumed a lot more energy, but it was inconsistent data for everything we had seen in the past. We had eaten into the buffer 2 times in the past. One time, I believe it was 10 miles into the buffer, and Shane, correct me if I'm wrong. And another time, I think it was at least, another 12 miles into the buffer.
You're correct.
That knowledge.
Yeah.
And so we didn't think anything about, we weren't even going to consider stopping at Apple Green with a 14% state of charge.
Alex,
you're correct, Dave. But the difference this time was that we kept our speed up. In the times previously, like I said, the one outside of Sioux Falls, we were into the buffer, but I dropped that speed down to like 45 miles an hour, because at those points, halfway through the trip, we had a little more flexibility in, the speed that we could keep or the amount of time that we stayed plugged into a charger. Toward the end here, the margins just got that much slimmer in each of those factors. So, if we had stayed plugged in to this charger in Fredonia for 5 minutes longer, it could have been different, but then again, maybe the Ioniq 6 would have stayed ahead at that point. And maybe if we had gone 65 instead, we would have made it to the charger. But then the Ioniq 6 with the fuller battery would have passed us. So the difference.
Alex, when you were running it down on that stretch,
yes.
So there's something that our viewers, a lot of people don't totally know. Alex, I'm not even sure if you're aware of this. Shane, I know we've talked about it. Dad, I know it's happened to you. But there's something called BMS sway. And Shane, if you can show everyone your shirt, don't trust the BMS. Essentially, when electric cars are, and this is in no way for us to blame the Lucid. I don't want it to come off that way at all. We are putting the car into an extreme use case, all of these cars, and running them hard constantly. Like, imagine doing 50 hours of Nürburgring lap times on a car. That's basically what's happening here with a battery pack. But there is this phenomenon with electric cars where they can calculate how much energy is left when in the battery pack when there's a resting voltage, when all the cell bricks are balanced. We actually talked to the engineers ahead of this, and they were like, hey, when you come off a track day with a Lucid Air, like let it sit for a few minutes so it can get some resting calculations on the battery packs. After driving and charging and driving and charging and having no resting voltage for 40 plus hours at this point, maybe 45 hours, I don't even know. Alex, I'm curious if the car clearly had different behavior at the 0% mark, some of which, yes, we can say, okay, we were harder on the car because of the speed, but also some of which we should say is probably due to BMS sway because of the behavior differences later. But what I'm curious is, did the car go like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0%, or were you having a pretty linear discharge curve down that low?
I recall it being a pretty linear discharge curve. I don't think it was reducing its projected state of charge any more rapidly or differently than it had at other points. Again, it was just that we were holding a higher speed in this stretch than we had in the times that we ran into the buffer previously.
Yeah, so the higher speed, and then also clearly it just didn't give you the power past zero. Because when I did the range test in the car, which was a data point you guys were referencing throughout the drive, it stayed at 70 miles an hour, which honestly, from an energy consumption standpoint, isn't that much more than 77 for, I forget exactly how many miles, but at least 10 miles, 15 miles at highway speeds,
right,
deeper into the buffer. And
right.
So, Shane, what's your take on all of this? We'll get into what happens when you run out, but Shane, I'm glad you're back on the podcast. I'd like for you to share a little bit on what was going on when the car was running out of charge.
Yeah, so I really feel like BMS sway did have at least some part to play in this particular stretch of the trip. I mean, yeah, we were obviously pushing it really hard. Most people aren't even going to get anywhere close to 0% state of charge, but we had to take a gamble at this point, because if we reduced our speed or made a mistake at this point, we were probably not going to even hit the podium on third place. So we were pushing it as hard as we could. So I think one of the main issues with this part of the trip was we had 2 less than ideal charging stops right before this. So on our little sheet right here, actually, Fredonia and Victor should be swapped. So we got to Fredonia first and then Victor, and then that was our last stop before we ran out. So unfortunately for these 2 stops, either in the case of Fredonia, neither of the 350s were working. We were stuck on a 150. And then in Victor, I think there was only one 350 that was working, and it was being used by an EV6. So again, we were stuck at a 150. So we had 2 not great charging sessions right in a row. And so we were kind of getting on edge a little bit and trying not to stay on the hook any longer than we needed to. So I feel like, especially in Victor, we undercharged a little bit, obviously, but we just decided to play a gamble in the buffer, and unfortunately this didn't pan out for us on this time.
So, Alex, for whatever reason it was, the buffer wasn't as available before. Certainly speed, I think, of course, some BMS sway. But, regardless, the car said 0%. That means, okay, you're out. I don't think Lucid should be faulted at all. I've certainly seen some comments that like, wow, the Lucid is inconsistent. It's like, bro, we've been pushing this thing. Like, it's that's my view. You guys, everyone can make up their own opinion. We put the data out there. But regardless of the reason that the car wouldn't go below 0 like it had before, what was it like driving? You were wide open throttle. There was a service station. What the heck happened when you started to drop speed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as the data shows, by the second or third time that we ran into the buffer, when I was driving, I was like, whatever, no big deal, because I knew the buffer would be there. And even as the car started, flashing warnings on the gauge cluster, it would say things like, oh, power reduced. And, I wasn't going to go wasting our range by like flooring it just to see what happened. But it felt pretty normal and very drivable, even when it was, into the buffer. But this time, outside of Albany, we did run into that buffer and then beyond. And at that point, yeah, I think there's a shot in the video where we ran out of it just wouldn't go anymore. I was driving what happened first was I was on cruise control. I was using cruise control, and the speed started to drop in cruise control. So I was like, oh, this is not a good sign. So I disengaged cruise control and I started to drive manually. and I, would put my foot on the accelerator, nothing. I ended up flooring it, and the speed just gradually started to drop back down. So at that point, it was basically, emergency, like safety mode. Where can I get this off, that's in a safe place for us and everyone else on the road? And sure enough, there was a large service station that we basically managed to coast into. And once we got into the service station, it had just enough juice to maneuver around the parking lot and get to we thought we found a 110 that we could plug into just for a little while to do something. Didn't end up working out that way. But then, yeah, we, as the video shows, it was a big ordeal to get out of the parking lot. And we got into a neighborhood.
But you did get plugged into a 110, right, Dad? I saw it on my app that you were charging at 1 kilowatt.
That was the moment. That was the moment when I went inside to try and find some assistance from someone who worked there. So I missed that.
Oh yeah. Dad, you're still muted. So if you unmute, then we can hear you. Hold on. Let me unmute.
I'm
Dad,
sorry. I apologize. So we did plug into a wall outlet. I was like, Alex, go find the person that has the keys to this gate in the back, right? Because there's a secret entrance over there. And Shane was like, Dave, I see an EV go. It's 3 miles off the road. And Alex was like, we're not getting back on I-90. That's not going to happen.
Smart move, by the way. Smart move.
The vehicle would not have been able to get back onto the highway.
Right.
No, yeah.
Right. And so what we did was we're like, okay, all the employees that worked at this Apple Green, and there was a Burger King, there was a Starbucks, we're like, someone's going to have the key to be able to like open up that gate. And so, Alex, go find that out. In the meantime, I was looking all over the place for a 110. Finally, Shane, we found one. We plugged in. And then all of a sudden, Alex comes out with this young lady, and she's like, I got the key. And so we're like, oh,
Alex,
this is
what was
great.
that like? Is this story never made it in the video? So what happened when you went inside, Alex?
Exactly. So I went inside, and it was sort of this big, like, mini mall service station where, like Dave said, there was a Burger King, and there was a gift shop, and there was a Starbucks. And I asked around for a few employees at different kiosks, and eventually I learned that the manager of the location was working at Starbucks. So I got in line at Starbucks, and when it was my time to order, my order was very unusual, I think, what you would usually get at Starbucks. I introduced myself. I said I was in a bit of I think I introduced myself by saying, hello, I'm an idiot, and I'm driving an electric car, and we ran out of battery on our road trip. And at that point, I sort of explained the situation. I said, we're trying to reach this charger. It's in this neighborhood behind, but there's this gate that we see locked. Is there a chance that you have the keys? And actually, the young lady was very, very friendly and amused by the situation. She helped us out with a smile. She finished the order that she was doing, and then she came out and unlocked the gate for us so we could get into the neighborhood.
So we test a lot of different electric cars that sometimes once they die won't let you restart them without adding a certain amount of energy back to the battery pack. So like General Motors vehicles requires like 7% state of charge to be reached before they allow you to, re-energize the car. But we have to give Lucid props that even though it died at 0%, it showed 0. It said the car was stopping. Like that was all normal, other than you weren't able to use the buffer. You put in a tiny bit with the wall outlet, and then the car was still drivable right after
Did we even need that little bit that we got on 110?
The car never actually died. Let's go through this. We were smart because we were concerned that we wouldn't even be able to open the charge flap or do basic things in order to get energy in the car. We plugged it into the 110, and then as we were driving through the neighborhood out the back, Kyle, the car started going like 25, 18. And Alex, he's like, I'm throwing in the towel. And this part didn't make it into the video either, which I'm about to tell you, which was hysterical. Alex was laughing at me, and Shane was as well. He pulls into this little side street, and it was right before Halloween. And there was a house there with major Halloween decorations with lights all over the place. I'm like, pay dirt, this is amazing. We're going to plug into the 110 at this guy's house. And so what did I do, guys? I went up to the house. I knocked on the door, and no one came to the door. And so we did not unplug their Halloween lights, but we came back out to the car, and we're all standing in the street. And all of a sudden this SUV pulls in. Remember this, guys? This SUV pulls in, and I go, listen, and he started to pull into that driveway where the house was, where the Halloween lights were. And he was like a 19-year-old kid. And we go, hi, we're on a race from Seattle to Boston, and we're about to run out of juice. Is there any way? And guys, tell me, I was super nice. I was super kind. And I said, if there's any way that we could plug into your lights out there just for maybe a little while before the tow truck comes, we would greatly appreciate it. The guy looked at me and he goes, no. And he rolled up the window, pulled into his driveway, got out of the car, and went in the house.
Didn't you offer him money too?
No.
Oh.
Oh, I actually, yeah, I think I did.
You did. I think you offered him some money.
You're right. I did. Yeah. But the guy was like, he was mean. He was nasty. And okay, so what? He has his right to do that. And so Shane, then you can describe what we did trying to get the tow truck.
So you decided to try and call Lucid, and we're going back and forth, and then your phone ended up dying, and then
the battery in my phone died, Kyle.
So you trying to get a tow truck from Lucid was a bit of a fiasco, not necessarily Lucid's fault, because your phone did die. But while you were doing that, I just figured I might as well just see if I can call somebody and see if they'll get here any quicker, because I think they gave us, it was going to be like 60 or 90 minutes or something at the very least. So I just pulled up Google Maps and looked at the first towing service I could find, called them up, and they were able to help us out, and they got there in like 30 to 45 minutes or something. So that ended up working out great.
And meanwhile, Alex popped the frunk, and he's sitting in there, and it's like, it looks like he was taking a hot tub bath in the frunk of the Lucid.
Very comfortable. I mean, the Lucid is a tremendously comfortable vehicle throughout, but the frunk was a nice place. I took the floor partition out and sunk way down into the floor, and I did feel I'm not sure if it's watertight, but it was pretty cozy, and I think if you did fill it with some warm water, it'd be a nice place to.
So as that's happening, this nice woman comes out of the house across the street, Barbara.
She's a legend.
She's a legend, right? She comes out and she says, "Are you boys okay?" And we're like, "Well, we're on an electric vehicle race across the country," and she goes, "Well, I figured it was an electric vehicle, seeing that how he's sitting where the engine's supposed to be." That was so funny. She was unbelievable. And she said, "Well, before my husband passed away, who was a New York State trooper, we had a motorhome, and we've got a level 2 here at the house. Would you like to use it?" And we were all but like, "What?" And so Shane, you went over to try and figure it out, remember?
Yeah. So they had one of the little, I don't know what they're called, but they're the round shape connectors. So she had one out in front, and so
like a NEMA connector type thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So
was it one that worked with what you had?
No. So I did not have an adapter for that. And then she went and showed me what kind of cables she had for it. Unfortunately, those weren't going to work either. But she was, obviously a sweetheart, and letting a random stranger walk through her home to see what kind of RV charging stuff she had. Like it was amazing.
So the tow truck got there, you got it hooked up. We saw Barbara took you over to the EV Go on the trailer, or she took you in her Subaru. But what I couldn't figure out, Shane, maybe you can tell me, why did you have the car towed to EV Go and not to Electrify America, where you could have gotten a faster charge?
I think we were just trying to get juice in the car as quickly as possible, because that EA charger was going to be in a very busy spot. It was, another 7 to 8 miles away. So I think we did the right thing, even though we ended up even taking even longer than we would have, because we didn't really need much to get to our next destination. And it was a 50 kilowatt unit, so not amazing or anything, but enough that a few minutes is going to at least get you a few miles down the road. So. Right.
Like what Shane was saying, this EV Go that we ended up going to was only a 50 kilowatt, but it was definitely the closest in proximity. And unfortunately, when we arrived there and got dropped off the tow truck, a gentleman was there, first time road tripping in his EV9 with his family. And not sure, we didn't ask him, we didn't want to prod, but I think he was charging to 100%, as one does in their very first EV road trip. But so that, was a little bit of time spent as well. But like Shane said too, we just knew that would be a hell of a lot faster than 110 if we managed to, or level 2, even if we had managed to plug in with Barbara. But we just got enough that we needed to get to this next, level 3 fast charger with 350, which was the last one we did before we made it to Boston, right? So
you made it to Boston. Everything, that was documented. I wish there was more footage of all of this unfolding, to be honest. I think next time we just gotta run cameras nonstop.
It was would have been great on camera, but like we weren't in panic mode, but like the strategy mode was like running in full tilt then. So we were, actively participating in loading off the tow truck and then pushing it in neutral into the charger. And, then just thinking what we could do to get going as soon as possible again. So yeah, next time we run out of battery, we'll film a lot more.
Yeah. So you made it to Boston, obviously safely. That's the most important from my side, especially when, I had 29 people that I was worried about the whole time. You guys were dead on the side of the road. I'm like, gosh, the last thing we need is like, some issue, a dangerous situation on the highway. I'm glad you were able to get out with that back gate. All of these things really worked out awesome. And you of course made it, which is awesome. However, what was the finishing order? You came in 8th place, right? By the time it was done, did the Genesis end up? I can't remember. Did they finish before you?
The Genesis was ahead of us. It was just your car and the 2013 Model S that was behind us.
So where the big debate online that I've seen, obviously, I think we should address. Shane's been having some conversations with Lucid owners. I've certainly been fielding a lot of negativity. Some people even to the point saying that we are sabotaging the brand on purpose, when I know, I'm like, guys, we built this team. We had them talk to the engineers as current and previous Lucid owners and automotive journalists. These are not dumb people. You guys rock. You push the car hard. Yes, every team has some optimizations that can be had here or there early on. I think you guys learned your lesson, overcharge a little bit and then keep the speeds on. But I think let's start with Shane. What would you say to the Lucid owner? Shane, you've been the closest to this situation. What do you think the concerns are? How would you guys respond? And even before that, Shane, where would you have finished up if you guys didn't run out? Was first place wasn't possible, right?
No, absolutely not. I don't think, even if we had optimized perfectly, I don't think there was any way we're going to beat the Taycan. I don't think that was possible at all.
And that was clear from
Model 3 though.
Early on, too.
Yeah. Was Model 3 ever a consideration?
It seems like for the first half, they were a good, like 30 minutes to an hour ahead of us. Things did get a lot closer in that last 1,000 miles or so. So if we had executed these last, 4 to 5 charging stops perfectly, or picked better charging options or whatever, I think there was a chance we would have finished really close to the Model 3. I personally don't think we were going to beat that either, though.
Well, the thing that they had, the reason I think it was so close early on was they had that stretch of version 2s that they got kind of stuck at. And then they hit the V3 corridors and just started putting the speed on. And of course, Tesla's infrastructure, which we always say the infrastructure comes with the car that you buy, is much closer to the highway on average than the public CCS stations. So yeah, Shane, what would you say to the Lucid owners that sort of doubted you guys? I mean, from my opinion, look, I'll be the first one to say this. I feel like you guys came under such unfair, harsh criticism over the last couple of days, over the last few videos. And I'm like, what the heck? We did this. This is all for fun. We're not here to make Lucid look bad. I even transported the car and AC charged it for as long as possible ahead of time. Like, this was a best effort situation. And for anyone to think that you guys went out of your way to lose is just ludicrous. So Shane, you've seen these comments more than I have. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of disappointment in the way we placed, especially for me. I mean, I certainly feel like I let the car down. The car did not let us down at all. But I feel like at least for the first, half, 2/3 of the trip, our strategy was pretty good. Obviously, we kind of tended to undercharge a little bit. That's something I would absolutely do a little bit differently, stay on the hook a little bit longer. That makes a lot more sense than having to slow down speeds to actually make it to the next charger. But I think overall, at least especially for the first half, we did pretty good. It's just unfortunately things kind of started falling apart once we hit New York and didn't pick the best charging locations. Unfortunately, I feel responsible for that. That was kind of my job throughout the trip. So, and I think what a lot of the kind of criticism I've been seeing from Lucid owners specifically is, why are you even going to 0%? And, you know, I think there's an argument to be made about that when like anybody on a normal road trip probably isn't going to push it to 0 all that much. But we were in a race and we really wanted to at least make third place. So we had to make some tough decisions. Obviously, there were some miscalculations here at the end, but we had to push it that hard to even maybe get to third place. And these cars, like Lucids, they charge best below 10% state of charge. So the lower we get to the station, the better charging speeds we're going to see initially. And so we tried to take advantage of that as much as we can, because especially at the beginning, that was the only way we were going to maybe keep up with the Taycan, if we could keep our charging speeds as high as possible for as long as possible. So unfortunately, our strategy just didn't end up working out quite as we hoped in this case.
So, Dad, you obviously have had some time to watch the videos back and, you know, see everything. I want to get to some positives. I want to get to like the car review stuff here in a minute. But Dad, what, you know, Shane talked a lot about maybe some strategic differences that, yeah, makes sense to get at 0% to maximize the car, but there's so many real world variables that could happen. Maybe target a 2 or 3% arrival just to allow some more in there. And when I say target that, I mean, you know, the car is going to over predict your arrival. So maybe target get a 7 or 8% when you leave. Dad, what would you have done differently? Where do you feel that maybe some time was left on the table? To be totally clear, every team left time on the table. And what was your impression about where maybe you guys could have sped some things up?
Yeah, I think the general theme here is that we should have charged probably another 3 to 4%, so we wouldn't have to shave speed off to feather it in. Right. I know everybody's saying feather it in is like drinking game for this thing, but you know, but there's you know, hindsight. It's very easy to look at that, especially after watching the videos, and you know, with everyone really becoming very, very angry at this team. You know, it's something that I'm hoping that people can start to understand a little bit better about our strategy. But Kyle, there's one place that I want to go, which is the Lucid itself in terms of how it charges. So, you know, it was said, you know, in the video in Billings, Montana, when we pulled in and I saw the Taycan charging at 304 kilowatts at 65%, I was like, it's game over, right? Because they're going to win. They had an average efficiency of 3 miles per kilowatt hour. We had an average efficiency of 3.3 miles per kilowatt hour. The Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive had an average efficiency of 3.8 miles per kilowatt hour. So while this is an extremely powerful, and we do need to get into how comfortable this car was, and it was great to get back in it, and a lot of the software changes, the lane changing, all the things that I missed when I had my Lucid Air Grand Touring. I was so happy and pleasantly surprised and super comfortable. I was sitting behind Alex, and I'm 6'5" and he's 6'10", and I was like, I don't need to sit behind Shane. That's where our drinks were. I sat behind Alex, and so it's an amazingly comfortable car. But when we're pulling at 50%, 154 kilowatts or 134 kilowatts. Right? The charging curve on this car is just not good. It should be better. And you know, some people I've read in the comments, oh, well, 30,000 miles from now, the 2025 Taycan's going to blow, the battery will blow up because they're not protecting it. But here's the thing, at a 50% state of charge, 304 versus 154, that's where they beat us. It wasn't
Well, keep in mind, They have a 20% or even 25% smaller battery pack than you did. Maybe 20%. You're 118 kilowatt hours. They're 97.
Yeah, they were just taking juice out of the chargers like a fire hose, and we were tapering, and we realized that, look, 150 kilowatts at 50% is still better than a Model 3 that takes about 105 kilowatts at 50%.
Yeah, but that's it's hard to do that because you really should look at C rate, not total, because the battery pack capacity on Model 3 is so much smaller. So it's hard to make that exact comparison.
That's true. Yeah.
But one thing that we do at Out of Spec is we do something called the 10% challenge. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Alex, but it's essentially where we simulate how a car will do in a road trip. And this test was the ultimate proof test, or I would say proof point of our 10% challenge. And clearly, what we do at our 10% challenge is we get to a charging station at 10% state of charge for 15 minutes, and then drive 80 miles per hour. And it is, once you exhaust that initial full charge, it's what's going to happen in the middle of the country when you're charger hopping. And Lucid is really good in this test, and you guys were right up towards the front. And I think Lucid actually is second place in our 10% challenge, to the point where I think it did 154 miles in this exact car, plus or minus. And Taycan did 194 miles as first place. I mean, it's another stratosphere. And so, yeah, you guys stretched it a bit farther on the first leg, but yeah, you smoked it down the rest of the trip. Model 3 had a huge advantage because of their charging locations close to the highway. Same with Model S. But ultimately, I think the curve is what lets the Lucid down. The deeper you have to charge, the slower and slower and slower you get relative to the other cars. Shane, Alex, what would you say on this?
If I can just jump in, as I've described this experience to friends of mine who are not as familiar with EVs, many of them know that the Lucid does have an amazing maximum range potential, but I had to explain to them that, yeah, like we've been saying, past about 50%, the time that we would have spent plugged in to gain the extra, couple hundred miles that it could have afforded us would have actually taken us longer than it would have to make it to the next charger. So, there are many, many other road trips and, driving considerations where it might make a lot more sense to actually stay plugged in to 70, 80, 90%. But in this instance, where we're really literally trying to shave seconds out of each leg to get to the finish line first, the strategy that we worked with was go to about 50% and unplug as soon as the rate starts to dip.
Shane, you're a current Lucid owner. You know the curve really well. You've driven this car a bunch. You've had all the nerd data on it. What would you say about the curve, about the charging performance of Lucid in comparison to other vehicles?
I mean, it's not class leading. And I mean, obviously Taycan is on a completely another level. So leaving out the Taycan from the comparison, things like eGMP platform, while their peak speeds are not as high, they hold over 200 kilowatts, well over, like 70%. And even the Grand Touring, it's below 200 kilowatts before 50%. So the curve really, I think, is what lets this car down, unfortunately. And even like anecdotally with my car, so I drive a Touring, my charging curve is actually a little bit weaker than a current Model 3. So like that puts it into perspective a little bit. And Lucid's 800 volt and Tesla is 400 volt. So that confuses me a little bit personally, but leaving that aside, I think Lucid's a little too conservative with the charging curve above, like 40% or so. So I don't know if that's something they can improve. They're planning to improve. They want to improve. But I think in this particular style of testing, that's the number one thing that lets us down is the charging curve.
And just from the outside looking in, when I look at Lucid, when I start comparing what I'm looking for in a car, which is to cover big distance, why else would you buy the longest range electric car on sale? I want to go more than 500 miles. Maybe if you're doing one stop a day, if you're just taking a leisurely cruise, none of this really matters. But if you're driving fast, charging fast, fast traveling, which is how us and a lot of our viewer base, not everyone, and maybe even a small percentage, but a lot of people like to just hammer. And, especially if you're in Germany or some of these markets where you can drive fast, you need to charge fast. And this is the main weakness of the Lucid. It's also the main weakness of the Tesla Model 3. It's the main weakness of a lot of cars that we test is the charging curve. And I'm glad to know at least Lucid has seen this video, and hopefully it can be improved into the future. That's our only hope. But let's just on one final note, really quick.
Hey, Kyle, can I just jump in on one thing? The peak that we saw a 339 once on this car. So we know the car can do it, but the car is just seemingly too conservative, and I don't know why. And so, the car is absolutely capable of taking in the juice at those kinds of speeds. We saw 333 once, we saw 339. So yeah, I'm just a little baffled why at 50%, why is the Lucid only pulling 150?
Well, a lot of it has to do with cell supplier warranty case. There's assumptive degradation profiles out into the future. The Taycan, everyone always says, that's the one thing we hear. It's like, it's amazing, but it's going to blow up. But there's so many first gen Taycans with a lot of miles. But then, I hear other things too. At least Volkswagen Group and Porsche are typically very conservative companies when it comes to engineering things. And there's more research to be done there, but I can't imagine they would make it charge. And I know the Taycan engineers really well, and I've pushed them on this a few times, and they're like, we had an eco charging profile in the first car. We got rid of it. These things don't degrade, just fast charging throughout its whole life cycle. They literally have no health preservation derating strategy in Taycan because they're like, this isn't hard on it. 320 kilowatts is nothing for that car. So to me, just crazy. Anyway, I just want to talk about one last point, which was really, I think, what a lot of people are confused on who didn't watch the whole series, which is I saw comments that were like, Lucid would have won if you didn't run out. And I think second place would have been definitely not possible at that point. But if you had optimized perfectly, maybe throughout the rest of the trip, which is almost impossible because no one did, maybe second place, maybe third. But it seemed like to be a battle with that Ioniq 6 third and fourth place. But keep in mind, Ioniq 6 and Model 3 were only around 15 minutes apart in their finishing. So second place, maybe not that far off. Alex, what would you say to that?
I think third was most likely for us. Had we, everything gone according to plan. And I think actually even talking at dinner that night to Team Model S and Team Ioniq 6, they were pretty confident that we would have finished on the podium as well. So too bad how it worked out. But I don't know if I can just jump in and say, as someone who reviews cars and to dispel any of the people who think we're trying to sabotage Lucid here, like I said at the start of this podcast, there's not another vehicle I would have rather done this trip in. The Lucid Air is so amazing. I've been lucky enough to drive every version of it in all sorts of different situations, many dynamic situations, and they all impress me equally from the Pure to the Sapphire. It's just such an amazing combination of, first of all, very impressive battery technology, impressive, efficiency, wrapped in this beautiful, amazingly packaged design. Like Dave was saying, we're both pretty tall guys. When I was trying to sleep in the passenger seat, I was sprawled all the way out. It was like a first class seat on a jet. And it just drives beautifully otherwise, to have that canopy roof. Saw some amazing sights, throughout the country that I hadn't seen before. And, even with my height, very comfortable, great ergonomics. It's just such an awesome mix of luxury and sport combined with practicality and safety technology and driver assist technology and great looks. So, it's a company that I think has achieved tremendously so far in its life, and I'm really excited to see what they continue to do. And I feel bad. I wanted to do Lucid proud too because I'm definitely a stand for the car and the company. But it was a great trip with some great teammates and some great learnings. And if we were going to do it again, we probably wouldn't make the same mistake. And I encourage any Lucid owner to look at our data and try and do better than us. But something that I want to drive home here too is like, this is an extreme road trip situation. Very few people are reasonably going to be road tripping in this style. And if you just take a little bit more leisure to stay plugged in, on your charger, so you can hold your speed or just have less of a headache, running into the buffer and beyond, you're going to be able to do it. And I don't need to remind anyone who's driven a Lucid just what, like I was saying, what a lovely car it is. So if you're a Lucid owner, you're going to continue to have a great time road tripping your car. Absolutely.
Your car is actually directly beneath me right now, and I got in it earlier today, and the packaging, Alex, is unbelievable. The fact that this car shares the same footprint as Taycan and has so much interior space. I mean, it must have shocked and still shocks the entire automotive industry as to how much they were able to downsize components. And the handling dynamics, I've done track reviews of this car. It's unbelievable. Right. What were you going to say there, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, huge interior, not to mention massive frunk and trunk too. So it's like what they fit in this thing is amazing for sure.
So let's talk about the car. You guys drove this Lucid over 3,000 miles nonstop. Dad, I'd like to go to you first because you've owned this exact trim in a previous generation. What improved? What stayed the same? What was your impression? Are we going to see a new out-of-spec Dave car anytime soon? What would it take to see a new out-of-spec Dave car sometime soon? What's your impression?
No. I'm done. I've got my keeper now. I've got my Model 3. So I think overall, the car just is so tight and refined. There was no wind noise. It was just tight. There were no creaks, no rattles. It just is a solid car, and the components inside are amazing. But the thing that I noticed about when I had my car is just the little things with the software. The fact that it can now do lane changing, although it kind of did for a little while, and then it didn't for a little while, and that was weird. But we ended up getting it back to work. As a matter of fact, we got it back working after we left Victor before we had to pull off at the Apple Green. We were all excited. This was great. And the way with which it took the lanes and all of that, the massaging seats are like unbelievably comfortable. And when Alex was sitting in the passenger seat and I was behind Shane, it was better than a first class seat on one of the most expensive airlines in the world. It's so super comfortable. And, but the car just seems to have grown up from a software standpoint. I still don't like the sun visor. That still gets in my way. And I just wish they could redesign that. And when I saw that designed in the Gravity, I couldn't believe they kept that design. But it's just, the glass roof is unbelievable. You know what else is better too, Kyle, is the climate control system. Because it got warm a couple times. I remember, I know this was fixed early on, but it was nice to see that the climate control can keep up with the cabin now with, 3 guys in there in a hot day, because it's a little bit of the greenhouse effect. There's a lot of glass in that car. So overall, this is a great car if you're considering it. It's amazing. And the one thing to keep in mind also about just the basics in terms of having, if you leave your house with 100 mile or 100% state of charge, I can go from where I am here in Connecticut to Boston and back, and I don't have to charge, right? And so that's a major benefit. Just avoid charging altogether. And I think Alex hit the nail on the head. Look at your use case. What we did was we pushed it to an extreme that most normal people will never, ever do. But I think
to that point, I would just say to that point, Dave, like a lot of our stops were almost uncomfortably short, where if you were road tripping in an EV, you would want to stop and, stretch your legs and have a slightly longer snack than most of the stops that we did. And if you have that mindset and that capability, that attitude to let it stay plugged in a little longer, you're going to have the range you need.
Yeah, the point of this test was not necessarily to be a customer representative experience. No one's driving coast to coast nonstop. This was meant to say which is the fastest road tripping electric car. And then the viewers themselves can decide how they'll use the car. In fact, I would probably choose the Lucid over a Taycan myself, even though I'm a big, Porsche fan, just as a leisure trip. The space, the comfort, the way that car goes down the road is amazing. So it's convinced Shane to buy one. I'd love to hear Shane's opinion after driving not only his car a bunch, but then the 2025 with the sort of refresh updates, snappier software. What were some of the highlights on the car for you, Shane?
So for me, coming from a touring, there's plenty of stuff that really felt like home, felt wonderful. And really all I'm missing in my car compared to the GT we drove, one thing being the massaging seats, which are absolutely fantastic. I like them better even than the i7 massaging seats personally. And then other than that, it's just the range and the power. So power not really meaning a whole lot for us in this particular sense, but the range was pretty incredible. And so being an owner for, it's been close to 20 months now. It's really awesome to say that my car is better now after almost 40,000 miles than it was on the day I picked it up. I don't think there's too many cars that you can say that about. And so while Lucid was perhaps a little bit slow on, software updates and enhancements, for the first few years or so, things are really starting to pick up the pace now. And there's been a lot of really awesome software updates this year and new features. And it feels like they're really committed to making the software class leading like it really should be. So I'm really looking forward to that continue to evolve.
Yeah, Lucid's new tagline is no compromise, or no compromises. And it's like everything's a compromise. But if they're going to go no compromise, then man, charging curve, and then we're kind of done. So I'm going to ask you all one final question here at the end of the podcast. It went a lot longer than I expected, but there was so much to get into. And I'll start with you, Dad. If you had to choose any car in the i90 Surge, which was supposed to really simulate the longest range, fastest charging executive sedans, or really any car that we can get in our market, would you go in the Lucid again? Would you take a different car? Because there was a moment where you thought Taycan in Montana, I saw. What would you?
I know. Yeah, Drew offered me up the Taycan in Billings, and I was like, no. Here's what I would do. I would absolutely take the Lucid again, and I would take what I've learned, and I would try to do better. One of the things that I've had a couple of interesting readings of comments in the videos, and a lot of people are angry at me because this is the third time that I've run out this year, right? And guys, there's reasons for each one of these things, and I think the most important thing is that we as a team were making collective consensus decisions.
Hold on 1 second. You've actually never run out, because I ran out with you you've always been a passenger. It's maybe just the bad luck Dave curse and one of these things, but I ran out in the F-150 driving. Andreas was driving the second F-150, and then Alex was driving this one. So technically, you're just along for the ride.
Yeah, I don't know why everybody says I ran out. That's a good point. I'm not the one but I think a lot of people on this particular trip, just because Shane and Alex, we decided early on, all right, Dave, you film and we'll think, right? And then we'll talk. I think a lot of people thought that I was the one making all these decisions. And yeah, clearly I voiced my opinion, but so did Shane and so did Alex. I mean, Shane owns one of these cars. He knows the way that things work. And also, we were on the phone. Kyle, you were on the phone with me. We were making decisions. Why? Because we're not racing against each other. What we're trying to do with these races is showcase the best ability for each one of the cars to maximize what each car can do. And it really doesn't matter how I feel about the comments. I can take it. I mean, social media is a double-edged sword, right? The power of it's amazing, and the power of it is negatively can hurt. But I feel comfortable that we made some mistakes. And you asked me what would I do again? I would take the same car, and I would correct the mistakes that we all learned together to see how much better we could do it. And I think that I think we could have beaten that Model 3 had we done things correctly. I don't know, but that's where I'm at.
Wow, that's a spicy comment. Okay, thank you, Dave, for joining on the podcast. Alex, if you had to do this again, Lucid, teammates, the final comments from your side, plus everyone can see your article coming out here in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just repeating myself at this point, but I would 100% do it in the Lucid again. The Taycan was so impressive, and its fast charging capability. That was really cool. But, and I know that team said they were comfortable enough in the car. But just to have the spaciousness afforded by the Lucid, I mean, especially for me as a very tall guy, much appreciated that. I would have loved to have been in the i7 because, as I know and as you know, it is an incredibly comfortable, and just in terms of like maybe traditional luxury, the best in the contest and hard to beat in the industry, honestly. But then we all know how your charging experience went, so there's absolutely no chance that I would have enjoyed someone to drive me in the i7 so I could chill in the back, for maybe like a single state road trip perhaps. But for this, not at all. So, and then just no other car that combines the, elegance of dynamics and comfort and design and, interior appointments and features that the Lucid does for the price it does too. 100% Lucid. I hope that I can join Shane and other Lucid owners in some amount of time to be an owner myself. It's an awesome vehicle. Yeah, no complaints. Maybe I would hope the only thing I would change about the car is I hope that Lucid adds some more reconfigurability of the gauge cluster graphics and what can be shown in the gauge cluster at some point. But fundamentally, what it already has, fantastic.
Yeah, the bones of that car is just absolutely, amazing. And this trip is showcasing a lot of the long range stuff. We've done other videos too. This thing freaking rips. It just walks an RS6 on a straightaway. It can go sideways all day long. It can be fast around corners. Shane is notorious for being a canyon carver in his Lucid. We all love the performance of this car, which this test isn't really exploiting. But Shane, would you do it again in the Lucid? Some final thoughts here as we end up the podcast.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it would be so amazing to take everything I've learned and undo some of the mistakes that we made. And I do want to reinforce the fact that pretty much really all our decisions were team-based, and I wouldn't change you two guys out for anybody. That was the perfect team as far as I was concerned. That was fantastic. So I would absolutely do it in the Lucid again. It's just so well-rounded in so many ways. There's not many cars that beat it in any particular category. So I've loved it for my complete ownership experience, and I will continue to love it for years to come, I foresee.
Yeah, I mean, we all did love it, and I think hence our collective disappointment that it ended up the way that it did. But I think we can all very confidently say that we did our damnedest and pushed the car to its limits, and really accomplished what this experience, this road trip was designed to test. And we found some stuff out. That's for sure. Here we are.
And there it is over my shoulder. If you're watching this on YouTube, there's your car. And so, thank you to you guys for piloting it. Honestly, we chose your team specifically because of there was some sizing requirements too. Alex was like, don't put me in the Taycan. it's just really tall. And obviously the crazy fact is that we had someone 6'5", someone 6'10", and Shane, who's not small, in this car, going across the country is just absolutely amazing. And so, shout out to Lucid for, I would say being ballsy enough to let us have this car and loan it to us. And certainly I feel like the rhetoric of people that don't want to watch 10 hours of content is, oh, it ran out of charge. That's the first thing people will hear. But when you really think about how this car did across the trip as a well-rounded package, is amazing. You guys pushed it, like, no question. I think, okay, we can harp on the mistakes all you want. Every team made mistakes. We're going to have this conversation across the whole thing. Like, as an average, you guys were boogieing. You got this car rocking. You were getting there low. You were doing the thing. And that's exactly what I wanted to see out of this car and why I chose you guys to go in it. And so I can't thank you all three enough for like wasting a week of your life to do this, and now an hour and 20-minute podcast afterwards. So I really appreciate the time and the support. And to the commenters, thank you so much for watching. And of course, sharing your opinions, both good and bad. We learn from everyone. And I hope this clears up a little bit of confusion and also adds some more context. Like I mentioned, we're doing this with every team, so plenty more to come. And thank you all for watching another episode of the Out of Spec podcast. We'll see you on another one again very soon. Leaving you now from the team's Lucid Air. Bye-bye.